Thank you for joining me for this part of the celebration of CT at 50. As we recognise the 50th anniversary of the first clinical CT scan, which was carried out on the 1st of October 1971, it is very important to recognise the radiologist who made this possible. James, known as Jamie Ambrose, was born on the 5th of April 1923 in Pretoria, South Africa. At the outbreak of the Second World War, he volunteered for service, but was refused on the grounds of age. So he went to Johannesburg and started studying engineering. Once he reached the age of 18, he applied again and was accepted for training in the South African Air Force. Upon completion of his training, he was attached to the RAF as a fighter pilot, flying Spitfires in the Middle East, Italy, and southern France from 1941 to 1945. After the war, he returned to South Africa and decided to switch to studying medicine at the University of Cape Town. You can see Jamie Ambrose here in the final year medical class of 1952, the year that he graduated from the University of Cape Town. 2 years after graduating, he came to England, where he began his radiological training at the Middlesex Hospital in London. He then became a senior registrar at Guy's Hospital in London, obtaining his DMRD in 1956 and the Fellowship of the Faculty of Radiologists in 1959. He moved to the Atkinson Morley Hospital in Wimbledon in South London, which at the time was one of the busiest neurocentres in the United Kingdom, in the summer of 1959. Initially as a senior registrar in diagnostic radiology, and he was later appointed consultant radiologist there in 1962. When he joined the Atkinson Morley Hospital, the only imaging techniques available at the time, such as pneumoencephalography, were invasive, traumatic, and of limited efficacy. Jamie had a great desire to develop better, non-invasive diagnostic methods for imaging the brain in his patients. Initially, he researched a lot of opportunities with both ultrasound and radioisotope scanning. One morning in 1969, Jamie Ambrose received a call from an old acquaintance, Dr. Evan Lennon, who was at the time Principal Medical Officer at the Department of Health. He asked him to see a man called Godfrey Hounsfield and to listen to what he had to say. A meeting was arranged, and Hounsfield duly arrived to meet Ambrose at Atkinson Morley Hospital. Ambrose later recalled that the conversation was difficult and tedious, mainly because Hounsfield was not particularly forthcoming, other than to reiterate that the method that he had devised was fundamentally different to that currently used in X-ray imaging. It was, he claimed, more efficient in photon usage and likely to be much more sensitive to small density variations in tissue. At the end of the tour of the department, Hounsfield simply said, "I can do much better than that." Ambrose responded, "You can produce better images, but by using X-rays in a more efficient and fundamentally different way?" "Yes," was Hounsfield's reply. Ambrose then said, "You sound very confident. I think we had better get you to show us." So Ambrose arranged for a bottle specimen of a brain to be borrowed from a local museum for Godfrey. 5 weeks later, Hounsfield came back with the now famous Polaroid picture of the transverse axial brain cut. Ambrose recalled later thinking that the image was crude, but the potential was electrifying, and he said to Hounsfield, "Do you realise what you have done?" "Yes," was Hounsfield's answer. From late 1969, Ambrose was a key member of the team that collaborated with Hounsfield in creating a practical CT scanner. Testing and modifying mock-up models of the scanning gantry, patient table, headbox and other systems in the CT scanner design. By August 1970, they had produced the design and specification of the first prototype scanner. It later became apparent to Ambrose that Hounsfield had in fact previously seen and talked to other distinguished and senior radiologists, most of whom had said that Hounsfield was just another crank and should be dismissed as such. Thank goodness that Ambrose did not dismiss him as well. On the 1st of October 1971, Jamie Ambrose with Godfrey Hounsfield made medical history by carrying out the first CT scan on a live patient.
Dr. James Ambrose.
This is the very first CT scanner which was ever made. It was installed here in 1971, and on October the 1st we scanned our first patient in it. This patient was actually a middle-aged female patient with a suspected tumor in the left frontal lobe, and we saw the brain in a great deal more detail than we'd expected. We were able to identify cortex, white matter, the ventricular system, and the cystic tumor which was present in this patient's frontal lobe. This was successfully operated on, and this was the result which caused Hounsfield and myself to, I suppose, really to jump up and down like footballers who just scored a winning goal.
Ambrose and Hounsfield presented the results of their initial scans at the British Institute of Radiology annual conference on the 20th of April 1972 to a packed room with standing room only and a tremendous response. Ambrose continued to carry out a series of clinical trials and received a standing ovation when he presented the results of these at the Radiological Society of North America conference in Chicago in November 1972. Jamie Ambrose received many awards, including the BJR Barclay Prize from the British Institute of Radiology in 1974, the annual prize from the European Congress of Radiology in 1977. And it was my privilege to present him with the Honorary Fellowship of the British Institute of Radiology in 1993. The consensus, especially amongst his colleagues, is that despite these honours, he did not receive the recognition he so richly deserved for his pioneering work. Jamie Ambrose suffered a heart attack in 1983, and he retired in 1988, moving to Argyll, where he continued to pursue his love of plants and wildlife. He died on March the 12th, 2006. Without the open-mindedness and positive attitude of Jamie Ambrose, it is highly possible that we would never have had the development of the clinical CT scanner that we take for granted today. Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for listening to this part of the celebration of CT at 50.